after just having a meeting with the Biden transition team and domestic policy members of that team, including the executive director of transition and Ambassador Susan Rice, who's just been named and picked as domestic policy leader. What we want to do today is to open with a short video, very short video of statements made by President-elect Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. We met with them to talk specifically about policy and to make sure that the policies of the Poor People's Campaign, and Reverend Dr. Liz Steele Harris will lay out how broad this campaign, how deep it is. We didn't need to meet with them face to face because we actually wanted to put on the table that we want to have a meeting with poor and low income people, moral leaders and economists at a White House level roundtable conference after the inauguration, because these issues are so critical. Reverend Liz will tell you how critical they are. You should also know, members of the media, that during the election, our campaign worked and contacted nearly 3 million poor and low wealth infrequent voters all over the country, but specifically in 10 states where we knew that poor and low wealth people could make a difference. We know that 6 million more poor and low wealth people voted in this election than in the last. 55% of poor and low wealth people voted for the Biden-Harris ticket, which was an 11% increase. And we know that one of the stories that's not being told, we talk about suburbia, we talk about other things, but poor and low wealth people turned out higher. And our report that we did on voting unleashing the power of poor and low wealth vote with Columbia University experts showed us, even before the election, that in 15 states alone, poor and low wealth people, if they just voted at 1 to 19% higher than they did in 2016, they could fundamentally decide who sits in the Senate and who sits in the White House. Right now in Georgia, poor people make up nearly 48% of the population of Georgia. 1.9 million are poor and low, who are workers who work for less than a living wage. 1 million don't have health care. This is the critical block. The poor and low wealth people now represent nearly a third of the electorate in this country. This is the block. And that can change the nature of our politics, but more importantly, as you listen to Liz, why we have to deal with the issue of poverty and low wealth. I'll come back in the closing statement and we'll take questions. We have several speakers who each will give a minute and a half from their various perspectives, and we will introduce to you the impacted persons who were on the line today, because our campaign never goes in just with people speaking on behalf of people, but we actually stand with those who have their own agency. And I will introduce them and they will say who they are and that they were in the meeting on today. So the video.
Ending poverty will not just be an aspiration. It will be a theory of change to build a new economy that includes everyone, where we reward hard work, we care for the most vulnerable among us, we unleash the potential of all our children, and protect the planet, which is the victim of global warming, and so we can live on. Where we build a country where you don't just survive, but you're able to thrive and grow. And I want to be part of your movement.
Seeing in each other a family member, a child, a friend, a mother, a father. And so when I talk about and think about then policy in that context, it is everything that I think about when I think about why I support Medicare for all. It is everything I talk about and think about when I say we need to lift up working families. We need to see what is happening in our country and treat our fellow human being as we would our neighbor, as we would want for ourselves. It's to fight for the least among these and to give voice and to lift people up with all that they deserve.
So as you can see, we have been meeting even before the campaign with the Biden and Harris. When he made that statement, it was before about 1.2 million people in September. We'd invited Trump. Trump chose not to show up. We did not meet today to talk about who would be in positions, but the positions that they would take and who would be at the center of the vision. And we laid out an agenda that's about really, if we're serious about healing the nation. Liz, would you talk about the campaign some, and then Shally, would you lay out the agenda?
Great, thank you so much. My name is Reverend Dr. Liz Theo-Harris. I'm the director of the Kairos Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice, and along with Reverend Barber, the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And indeed, the Poor People's Campaign has been organizing for years now. We are in 45 states across the country, have hundreds of different national partner organizations, faith denominations, labor unions, and we're very pleased to be able to have this meeting today with the top leaders of the transition team for the Biden-Harris administration. As we have been pointing out for some time now, before COVID-19 hit, there were 140 million people in this country who were poor, or one storm, one healthcare crisis, one job loss, one fire, one emergency away from economic ruin. We have been organizing those 140 million people and building folks alliances, unlikely alliances, and uniting people across all the lines of division. And in this pandemic, we have seen that these parents, these grandparents, these caregivers, these flight attendants, these fast food and restaurant workers, these healthcare workers, and many, many others, the teachers, the veterans, the construction workers, the unemployed, the homeless, and so many that hold up our economy and society need to then be at the center of our politics now. We were pleased to hear, and in that video that we just showed, when President-elect Biden stated that ending poverty will be a theory of change of his administration, and that the soul of the nation must be healed. We were pleased to hear Vice President-elect Harris say that our policies must begin with our neighbors who are most impacted by injustice. And so we had a positive conversation, one of what will be more, where we were able to put out that our concern, as Reverend Barber just said, is not so much about who's holding positions, but what positions they're going to hold, what policies they're going to advocate for. And that's why we held this meeting today to share the policy priorities that we have for the first 50 to 100 days of the administration. So I will turn it over to Attorney Shally Gupta-Barnes, who can go over some of those policies now.
Thank you, Reverend Liz. These 14 policy priorities, shape a moral and economic agenda for the first 50 to 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration. And they begin with enacting comprehensive, free, and just COVID relief that prioritizes people.
Can we put it up on the screen, please? Yeah. Thank you. So that the media can see them, just the broad strokes. Yeah.
Yes, just one moment.
Okay.
Go ahead, Shally.
Thank you, Rob. And maybe we can share the link to the, a link to the page as well. So the first priority is to enact comprehensive, free, and just COVID-19 relief that prioritizes people who've been hit hardest and first in this pandemic, who are poor and low-income people, and that mandates the collection and monitoring and reporting of the impact of the pandemic by race and ethnicity, but also income, occupation, and geography. It means equitable and free COVID testing, treatment, and quality care, regardless of income, age, ability, documentation status, insured status, or any other factor. It means also a guaranteed and adequate income, rapid and direct payments to low-wage and temporary workers, making sure that everyone is housed through a national rent freeze and mortgage moratorium, and a national moratorium on utilities shutoffs, increasing the impact by expanding food and economic security programs, increasing resources to keep all rural hospitals and community health centers open, and protecting people in congregate settings, supporting our schools, having significant student debt relief, and making sure all of these provisions are available to immigrants, again, regardless of documentation status. It means also our second priority is to guarantee.
Attorney Gupta, on the rest of them, can you do the just the sentence piece so that, because the media has limited time, and what we will do is send them the full piece so they can see it. If you could walk through 14 broad strokes. Yeah.
Yes, as you can see here on the screen, our second priority is to guarantee quality health care, regardless of any pre-existing conditions. Third is to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour immediately and guarantee the right to form and join unions to all workers. We must also update the poverty measure to accurately reflect the current conditions of poverty and make sure programs are funded to meet that need. Fifth, we must guarantee quality housing for all. Sixth, we have to enact a federal jobs program that prioritizes poor or rural and urban areas that have been hit hard and prioritizes socially beneficial jobs. 7, we need to protect and expand voting rights and civil rights, including extending statehood to DC and police and criminal justice reform. 8, we must guarantee safe, quality, and equitable public education at all levels, as well as student debt relief. 9, comprehensive and just immigration reform, from ending the building of the Southern Wall to establishing a special task force to identify and reunite families. 10, ensure all the rights of Indigenous people, including the free expression of religion, and to protect the sacred lands and practices of Indigenous peoples. 11, we have to enact fair taxes on the wealthy corporations in Wall Street. 12, we must use the power of the executive orders to meet these demands. 13, we have to redirect the bloated Pentagon budget towards these priorities as a matter of national security. And 14, we've asked to work with the Poor People's Campaign to establish a permanent presidential council to advocate for this bold agenda and lift up the needs of poor and low wealth people. And we will share the full agenda, which is available online, with everybody who is on this call. Thank you.
Right. And that last part will be with economists and moral leaders and public health persons and impacted people. I'll talk a little bit more about that as one of the pieces at the end. These are the broad strokes to the members of the media. You have the complete piece. We went in for a very, very, very serious agenda. We believe and know that it can happen within the first 50, 100 days. In fact, we call it a moral agenda for the healing of the nation. At this time, John Kavanaugh with IPS will say a word about why the Institute for Policy Studies has stood with us, stood by us, and continues to work with us. And then Thea Lee, who's with the economist with the Economic Policy Institute.
Great, thank you very much, Reverend Barber. Just quickly, there were 10 members of the Biden transition team that joined the call. So just to mention them, and I'll put them in the chat: Ambassador Susan Rice, Johannes Abraham, Congressman Cedric Richmond, Cecilia Munoz, Ashley Allison, Jessica Hertz, Minion Moore, Steph Feldman, Mark Gittenstein, and Josh Dixon, showing, I think, the importance they put to this issue. Let me just add 2 points to what's been said already. I direct the Institute for Policy Studies. We've worked proudly with the Economic Policy Institute, where you'll hear Thea Lee in a minute, but with the Poor People's Campaign on an audit of the state of systemic poverty and racism and environmental destruction and militarism, and on a moral budget. And just one key point for 2021, the opponents of this agenda will start once again in 2021 to argue that we don't have money to solve these problems, and that the price tag of these 14 points you just heard is too great. We were proud to work on a moral budget with input from EPI and other economists that pointed out that it will cost more to do nothing on these problems than it would to solve them. So that's one point. And a second one, an opportunity in 2021. We have been burdened in this country for the past 10 years by a Budget Control Act that says every time you increase domestic spending, you have to increase military spending. You'll note that one of the demands is to cut the military budget here. And for the first time in 2021, that Budget Control Act expires. We will have the opportunity to press for these important domestic priorities while at the same time arguing to cut the military budget, which takes over more than half of the discretionary budget of this country. Let me turn it over to Thea Lee of the Economic Policy Institute.
John, thank you, Reverend Barbara Shelley, Reverend Liz Theo Harris. The Economic Policy Institute is honored to stand in solidarity with the Poor People's Campaign. We've been thrilled to be able to work together to put together our blog post on moral and economic imperatives. And we support the 14 policy priorities that have been laid out here. And I wanted to make one big point today, which is that addressing, and this is building on what John just said, addressing poverty and inequality is not just about feel good altruism about doing the right thing. It is about supporting a healthy, robust, resilient, and sustainable economy. We cannot have a healthy and robust economic recovery if we do not address the inequality and deal with the systemic racial injustice and the gender injustice that is at the heart of it, that the pandemic has exposed the rot in the US economy. So these fixes that we've talked about, full employment, living wage, both raising the minimum wage, but also making sure that workers have a voice at work, have the ability to form unions, reforming the unemployment insurance system, which we've seen is completely broken, addressing universal health care and paid leave, a fair tax system so we have the revenues to be able to do all the urgent social programs we've talked about here, and the robust public investment in good jobs that the Biden-Harris campaign has talked about. So this is really about making real the campaign promises of the Biden-Harris campaign around building back better with infrastructure, with clean energy, with the care economy. These are the kinds of promises that have been made by the Biden-Harris campaign. And this group looks forward to working closely with the campaign. And we were encouraged by the meeting that we had just a few hours ago and addressing all the other safe communities, public health, voting rights that we've talked about. So as economists, we are enthusiastically in support of these important policy priorities, and we look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you so much. I want to ask some folk to introduce themselves that were on now. We can't bring everybody on. We never go into meetings of Poor People's Campaign without having persons that are impacted speaking to the issues. And so I want to ask us just a few. I want to ask Rob Stephen to put in the chat the full video that we played at the beginning of the meeting that shows the diversity of the voice, diversity of the policies, both through the pain and the power of this movement so that the members of the media have it. But I want to ask Zilla if she would say who she is and why she was in the meeting, and then Kenya, who she is and why she was in the meeting, and then Sarah, who she is and why she was in the meeting, and then Chris, and then Fernando, and then I'll come back and close out and we'll take questions. Zilla?
Hello, everyone. My name is Zilla Wesley. I live and work and organize in Washington, D.C. I was in the meeting because I've been impacted from the coronavirus in a lot of different ways, financially, mentally. Also, as of today, I've known 41 people who died because of coronavirus and this healthcare system. That's why I was in the meeting, and just seeing the system and how it's gotten worse is where we are. Because even I had my own health challenges. They thought I had potentially cervical cancer, so I had to get tested and all of that through this time. And it's just been very challenging in a way, because it's just like people are just in hallways. The hospitals are overrun. And also in May, I was supposed to graduate, and I mean, I did, but it was one of those things where I couldn't even have a graduation. People are like, it's time to, do your next steps, but I don't want to because of the student debt. And like, I just know once coronavirus is over, they're going to ask for their money, and I just can't afford any of that. So that's why I was in the room. Thank you.
Thank you for your witness in the meeting, Kenya. Zilla. Kenya?
Hi, my name is Kenya Alcocer. I was in the meeting because I am a mother of two. I'm currently COVID positive. And the reason why I was in this meeting is because we organize tenants here in Los Angeles with Los Angeles Tenants Union and Unión de Vecinos. We have a lot of our tenants that have tested positive. We've lost members. We have members that are currently going through this cycle. But one of the things that I think it's horrendous is the fact that we're expecting an eviction tsunami coming soon here in California. We are seeing our tenants being displaced during this pandemic. We are no longer having just to organize community members that are fighting for their housing, but now we have an increase of homelessness in our community that we have to address. So that is the reason why we're fighting back, and also to remember and to honor Pamela Rush that passed away from this, and she was supposed to be here today to tell her story, and she wasn't.
Thank you for remembering our dear sister Pamela, both in word and through the video. Sarah?
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me and inviting me. My name is Sarah Farrington. I live here in Durham, North Carolina, and I'm worker leader with NC Raise Up Fight for 15. Well, our organization is basically getting out there. We're a group of workers and leaders that, you know, amongst the poor that are trying to get out there, the voices of the workers, how hard we fight. We can't form unions. I personally have worked since I was 7 years old. And here I am 43 years later, still poor, still broke. So that's the point of all of us coming together, the strong conversations of the system is broken. And so we get out there and we talk to people, we get on the street, we bring people out and share their voices and let them know, you know, the more silent you are, you're not going to get fed. We have to hold people accountable. So within the year that I've been with Fight for 15, you know, I've had to tell many stories of being evicted and living in homelessness. You know, I was homeless once before with my 7 children. You know, I've come and gone, and, you know, it's unfair in this world that as hard as we work, as hard as we fight, people don't listen, and yet we stay in the same situations. But coming together is the most important thing. Again, we have to unionize. We need the $15 minimum wage raised immediately. What is wrong with paying people more and giving back into the economy for us to all eat and grow? So that was the purpose of my call, and so many more purposes, but to sum it down simplistically.
And this was you said to us one time how you grew up. You know, you didn't always vote, right? And
I've never actually. This year was the very first time I ever voted in a presidential election, and I went out and, you know, voted for the Biden-Harris ticket because what they're proposing, what they're saying is a part of my beliefs and what we need, the poor people need, the low wage, the unions, the people whose voices are not getting out there, that are still going, you know, McDonald's needs to unionize. Restaurant workers, tip workers need $15 an hour, you know, to sit there and say that a person has the right to judge me and pay me based off of my personality and not the value of my work. These are the problems in our society that needs to be stopped.
That's right. 62 million people every day work for less than a living wage.
I make $3.10 an hour plus tips. That's disgusting.
That's right. That's right. Chris?
Yeah, my name's Chris Olive. I live and work in Grays Harbor County in Washington State with a nonprofit called Chaplains on the Harbor. We work directly with poor, low income people, the unhoused community. We advocate for them and with them. I'm formerly homeless myself, recovering addict, and a veteran of the United States Air Force. And I joined today because I believe in the values and the policies outlined today by the Poor People's Campaign. And I think that they would have an immediate and profound impact on not just my community, but all over the United States if implemented.
Chris, how many people were in that homeless camp at one time in Aberdeen?
Well, the official number that the city had was a lot lower than what we observed on the ground. It at one point had a little over 200, and the county has numbers for Aberdeen as the population being 16,000 and 1,000 homeless people. So that's 1 in 16 people in Aberdeen have experienced homelessness.
Majority white.
Oh yeah, I would say at 95%.
Yeah. I remember when I was there, I asked y'all why you had the flag up, and you said it's to remind America who she's abandoned. We held the flag up for America. America hasn't held the flag up for us. Yeah.
Correct.
Fernando, my friend.
Thank you, Reverend Barber, and also thank you, Reverend Theo Harris, for the invitation. I'm Fernando Garcia, the Executive Director of the Border Network for Human Rights, which is an organization that is based in El Paso, and also a very proud member of the Poor People's Campaign. What we saw today was a powerful collective presentation by the campaign on the systemic issues impacting our communities, the political violence, economic violence, social violence against people of color, but specifically about poor people in the United States. We also show a vision. I mean, we presented a vision. We didn't only denounce poverty, but we show a pathway. There was a presentation of 14 priorities which are fully embraced not only by border network, but border communities, but also Latino and immigrant communities. All of the issues actually are shared by our communities, and one of them obviously is being we've been fighting for many years, which is immigration reform, which was also presented today, pathway to citizenship for the 11, 12 million people living in the United States without documents. But also we are calling for the decriminalization of immigrants and other communities, and also the demilitarization of the border, to stop the border wall, to reunify families, to stop putting children in cages and in jails. So I think we have a vision, and we share it with the campaign. Reverend Barber just said it. I mean, this is just the first step. This is the first moment of pressure on the next administration, and we're going to continue the struggle. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fernandez. And you're exactly right. Today was in the people often forget that in the history and legacy of nonviolent movements, civil disobedience movement, civil rights movement, the first of the 6 steps is always making sure whether you're talking to an ally or an adversary, but they'll know exactly where you stand, and that you don't just curse the darkness. You present a vision, and then you push people toward that. So we said to the Biden-Harris team, we want to be allies to this administration. The president-elect has said that he wanted ending poverty to be at the center of his theory for change. This first of several meetings, but we also reserve the right to be critical and to push this administration, because we know that oftentimes, far too often, the issues of poverty and low wealth, Republicans tend to racialize them, Democrats tend to run from it and talk more about the middle class and working people, and never even say the name of poor and low wealth people. We did a study called Unleashing the Power of Poor and Low Wealth People, and one of the first things they said is why millions of them do not vote is because they never even hear their name. They never even hear their conditions talked about. And then they talked about voter suppression and couldn't get off work and transportation. But the first thing is that they never hear their names. And what our campaign is saying, you cannot ignore nearly 50% of the nation. You cannot ignore such of nearly a third of the electorate. You just cannot do that. We also, as John said, we have to deal with the cost. We know people are going to raise that question. Oh, what is the cost? The question is, what is the cost not to do it? Joseph Stiglitz has written a book called The Cost of Inequality. And we know right now it costs $1 trillion for every year for child poverty to continue as it exists. $2.6 trillion for gender and racial gaps, racial wage gaps. We lost $1 trillion in government revenue when we lowered the corporate tax rate. And we know that every year, climate change is estimated to cost $3.3 trillion annually. All of this is in our report with the Economic Policy Institute. But even in this moment where we talk about death, we said today in the meeting that yes, people are dying, but there's another disaggregation. Public health officials tell us that we're not even keeping in a universal way, in a uniform way, the stats on poverty, who's dying and where, and class. But what they know from some of the ways that they're trying to get at those issues, it's not just that we've had nearly 300,000 plus people die, but poor and low wealth people are dying, whether they be Latino, whether they be Black, whether they be white. Yes, it's disproportionately 3 and 5 times higher among Black people and Latinos, but even then, it's not just Black people, it's not just Latino, it's poor and low wealth Black people. And we know that this COVID holds on in the fissures of our society created by systemic racism and systemic poverty. So we said to the campaign today, we can't go back to normal. People did not vote for normal. 55% of poor and low wealth people voted for change. We said normal is 140 million people living in poverty, as Liz has said. And for the media, it is important when we say poverty, don't automatically racialize it, because while Black people are 60.9% of all Black people are poor and low wealth, and 64% of Latino people are poor and low wealth, that's 26 million Black people, that's 38 million Latino people. But you should also look at the fact that there are 30% of white people that are poor and low wealth, and that's 66 million people. So we can no longer just racialize poverty. We have to deal with the racial side of it, the disproportionality. But we have to look at poverty and low wealth and the interlocking injustice of systemic racism, ecological devastation, denial of health care, and a society that spends 54 cents of every discretionary dollar on a war economy and less than 16 cents on infrastructure and education and wages and health care is not headed in the right direction. And especially now, where we've seen over 8 million new people enter into the poverty realm, and that's using the old measurements. To the members of the media, when you say 8 million more people entered into poverty, that's the old measurements. The measurements that say if a person makes $13,000 a year, they're not poor. That's the old measurement, and they don't fit. They didn't fit when they were first put in place, and they surely don't fit where we are now, which is why we are demanding a retooling of the measurement itself. And then when we know that billionaires have already made $900 billion, nearly $1 trillion in the midst of COVID. So what we said to the campaign, we cannot heal the soul of the nation without healing the body. And the body of the nation is sick with poverty, systemic racism, and the other interlocking injustices we talk about. And we said to them that if addressing poverty and low wealth and the interlocking injustices connected are not at the center of any administration's goal, and if a president and a vice president, no matter who they are, and their domestic people, can't say poverty and low wealth in public, then the efforts to heal the nation are constitutionally inconsistent, morally indefensible, and economically insane. The Constitution tells us how to heal this nation. It says establish justice, and then you get to domestic tranquility, which is healing. And then you hold on to it by defending providing for the common defense and promoting the general welfare. So we can't go back to normal. We've got to go forward. That's what we said. We said today in the meeting that neoliberalism isn't going to fix this. Just talking about the middle class isn't going to fix this. Just rebuilding the middle class alone isn't going to fix this. You've got to put poor and low wealth people at the center. Trickle down economics, what the Pope Francis recently called the magic theories of market capitalism, have failed us, and they don't work. We must lift from the bottom. And so we then said to the campaign, we would hope we can be allies. We will surely be that when it lines up. We will also reserve the right to be critics, because we even help push our allies. The movement has always done that. And we said we didn't need to meet with face-to-face with Biden and Harris right now. They've actually met with us on several occasions. We've been in conversation with the team. What we want is, after the inauguration, a White House level roundtable conference with poor and low wealth people, moral religious leaders, and policy and economic experts. You heard that we in June of this past year, we had 2.7 million people show up for our virtual mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington, put a face on poverty. We couldn't get in the street, but we shared with the campaign, we are planning right now, as soon as COVID is over, to have a mass Poor People's Assembly Moral March on Washington to put a face on poverty, from Texas to New York, from Michigan to Mississippi, from Alabama to Appalachia, from California to the Carolinas. And lastly, we said that we can't be silent anymore. The question of whether or not America can even be who she claims to be is how we deal with the issue of poverty and low wealth. Before COVID, we talk a lot about death, but before COVID, 700 people were dying a day from poverty, and we didn't hear a word about it. 250,000 people dying a year. We can no longer do that. We have to challenge the necropolitics of policy violence. And we have to, as we shared with President-elect Biden on Easter, when I did an Easter podcast with him, we said that the hope is in the morning. People are mourning and they're miserable because of poverty and low wealth and racism and ecological devastation, denial of health care and religious white nationalism and the war economy. They're mourning. And we said to him, if you address that mourning, if your policies address where people are crying, where they're miserable, then that's how the nation is healed. The hope is in the mourning. Where you hear people crying, that's where your policies ought to reach first and lift from the bottom. That's where hope is. And we said to them, you have won this time, but you won an election in a moment of pain, like Lincoln, like Johnson, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And there's only one thing that you can do in a moment like this. You've got to have courage, commitment, clear policies, and a refusal to compromise on the backs of poor and low wealth people. And you have to put a bold enough agenda together to rally the people, because nothing we hold dear today, from Social Security to living to minimum wage, ever happened by just politicians getting in a back room compromising. They only happen by having an agenda put forth by the leader of the nation, and then the people push that agenda, right? And the people having an agenda for the leaders of the nation and pushing. And that's what we've committed to do, because we love this nation. We love poor and impacted people. We're not speaking on behalf of them, we're standing with them. Members of the media, if you have any questions for anyone, we'll take them at this time. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Reverend Barber. My name is Yolanda. I'm the press secretary for Repairs of the Breach. We have a question from, I believe this is Aaron Morrison from the Associated Press. He has put it in the chat. He asks, did you see the video clips released from the meeting, meeting other civil rights legacy groups had with Biden-Harris, in which the president-elect appeared to be dismissive of some of their asks? Were you surprised by Biden's posture now that he no longer has the court the vote of Black, brown, and poor folks?
Well, that was their meeting. That's not our meeting. That was a meeting particularly about civil rights Black folk. And the meeting we had today with the domestic team and the meetings we have had with President-elect Biden and Harris, and what they have said before literally thousands, millions of people. When he spoke about poverty being at the center of this theory of change, it was 1.2 million people on the line. So I wasn't in that meeting. That meeting had a specific focus about positions. Our meeting is about the positions and the policies. What we do say is that we need to stop simple answers. When you hear people say that the reason some people lost is because of a phrase. The reality is, ultimately in this country, there's one place to expand the vote in a way that can transform our politics, and that's among poor and low wealth people. Black poor and low wealth people, white poor and low wealth people, brown poor and low wealth people, Asian poor and low wealth people, Native poor and low wealth people, gay, straight, poor and low wealth people from rural America and from urban, and all in between. And what we had in the meeting today was that diversity. We had a white farmer, we had Black fast food workers, we had white fast food workers, we had Latino, we had Native Americans. We believe that the rejected of this society have the power to come together. And that's what our movement is focused on. The 5 interlocking injustices that we've duly researched that are threatening any possibility of a genuine democracy. And the building out of a movement led by poor and low wealth people. We are servants with them, moral leaders, advocates, economists, and others. And that's where we chose to face. We will not be dismissed. You can't dismiss a movement if it keeps moving. But the first thing you have to do is lay down what your policies are. And I love the way Fernando said it. You cannot just lay down you can't just curse the darkness. You got to show the light. That's what our meeting was about today. And that's where I want to stay focused on it. One of the most powerful meetings that we've had with economists, public health officials, poor and low income impacted people, and moral leaders. We had 3 major denominational leaders in the meeting today, representing huge denominations. We have thousands of clergy and law leaders now connected to this movement. You know, we had one denominational leader that is leading over 5,000 congregations, the African American who's leading a predominantly white denomination. We had, the Reformed Jews there on the call. We had people of every race, creed, and color. That's what our focus is. And what we argue is that in all of these issues, we have to address them simultaneously. You can't address systemic racism and then don't deal with systemic poverty. You can't address systemic poverty and not address ecological devastation. You can't address ecological devastation, not address denial of healthcare. You can't address any of those without addressing the war economy. And you can't address any of that without looking at the lies and distortions of the false moral narrative of religious nationalism and how it impacts our political debate. And so what we're saying is the day must be over now, that we have debate after debate, conversation after conversation, and we never talk about poor and low wealth people. We talk about middle class, we talk about working people. We have to talk about 43% of this nation and growing because of COVID. That's where our focus is. I won't comment on what happened or did not happen in the other meeting. I was not there. That's not the meeting we were in. We are clear about this first meeting today and the meetings we're going to have in the White House after the inauguration. The things we're going to be doing next year, we're going to be re-inaugurating Moral Monday to keep the pressure on. And we're going to be organizing this mass poor people's assembly. And we're going to be pushing in every way possible because the agenda we have put forth is for the healing of the nation. There's no way to heal the nation. You cannot heal the nation if you do not deal with the issues of poverty and low wealth and the other four interlocking injustices.
Additionally, Aaron Morrison would like to know, can you call out something specific that one of the transition team members said that gave you hope about the policy priorities you've presented?
Well, Cecilia, I think her name, what was it? Liz, talk about that.
Munoz.
Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, she really deeply appreciated the fact that we had pulled this meeting together and said that it's not often, in fact, it's not really happened much in her life before, to have impacted folk talking about the stories that they come from and the solutions that folks are bringing forth to the problems, and that she took it very seriously and has every intention of both continuing to meet, make sure that the real expertise of poor and impacted leaders that are organizing across this country can help inform what needs to happen. And we were heard. That was surely affirmed.
And Susan Rice stayed the whole while as domestic policy person. And we are waiting, this was to lay it out. We want to hear, as we said to them, we're going to listen now to see if there's a change in dialogue. We want to hear President Biden, elect Biden, say to the whole nation what he said to 1 million people about the theory of change, because it's the truth. So, but I don't want the media to miss that. The president-elect said to the Poor People's Campaign, my theory, at the center of my theory of change is ending poverty. That is huge. You have a president and a vice president that at least ran on $15 a union, addressing systemic racism and expanding healthcare. Now, it's not everything. We got work to do. We are under no delusions. That's why on Monday, we're having a big meeting with the Progressive Caucus. We are no delusions. This is no time for us to sit down. We're not a movement that's going to say, okay, people have elected, we're going home. That's not who we are. We push we challenge our adversaries and we push our allies. But today in this meeting, most of them said they had never been in a meeting like this where poor and low wealth people themselves with these policy people said, here is the agenda. This is what we voted for. We didn't vote for you because you said you want to do everything. We voted for you because we heard enough to know we want to go in that way, and we can push you, and we can push you. And by pushing you, we actually help heal the nation. This is hard work, but it's got to be done.
Okay, we have Andrea Shalal. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name, with the Associated Press. She would like to know, have you received any assurances at all from the Biden-Harris team? Are you troubled that he chose Brian Deese with close links to BlackRock as a head of his National Economic Council?
We're looking at every one of the appointments, but let me tell you how we come at these appointments. And it's going to sound strange to some of you. There's a whole group of appointees. We come out of a tradition in 1964 when Lyndon Baines Johnson got elected. He was a segregationist, but the movement turned him into a civil rights president. That's the way we look at it. Whoever's appointed. We don't care who they are, black or white. We're going to push them with the movement to make sure dealing with poverty and low wealth is at the center of their agenda. We are preachers. We believe in the possibility of redemption, of transformation, of repentance. So we're not so much focused on just and like Thurgood Marshall said when he was asked, should an African-American replace him on the court? Thurgood Marshall said, not necessarily. He said, inevitable black race is going to come up and should. But even before that question is, where do they stand? Where are they in their judicial philosophy? He said, because, and then he said to the people, whoever we have to push. We have to stand. We have to put a face on poverty. So Deese is in that spot. We said today we want to meet with every secretary. And we're going in just like we went in today. Not by ourselves, not one or two people, but with poor and low income people, economists or not. If they push the agenda, we celebrate it. If they don't, we critique it. But we're not going anywhere. And that's what we have to factor in. It's almost as though people tend to think the people only matter in the election. No, the people matter during the election, but they also matter in pushing politicians and appointees in what they elect to do. And history is replete with folk who may have got appointed to do one thing or the other, but the movement changed the context in which they held those offices and those appointments, and they had to go further than they even imagined they would. That's where we are. That's the kind of movement we are. That's why we're broad and deep.
Okay, now we have Juana Summers from NPR. She asks, I know that one of your top policy priorities for the new administration is to enact just COVID-19 relief for people who are suffering. Congress is moving closer to a relief deal that would include a new round of smaller $600 stimulus checks, which for many people in this country may not be enough, and it may come too late. What did you hear from the Biden transition team in this meeting about future economic relief for families in this country? Does their plan go far enough to help low-income folks in this country?
Well, let me let Shally deal with some of that, but also say, again, we presented what ought to be. That was the goal of this meeting, to say to them what had to happen if we were serious. Nobody has gone far enough. And certainly this piece that now they're trying to call compromise is nothing but capitulation. Some want to call it a Christmas miracle. It's really a Christmas mess because it's like ignoring the real hurt of people, right? You ask my dear friend, Mary Jane Shanklin, she's on the line. She's a Kansas farmer. I see her down there. She'll tell you that for people who sit in offices where they make nearly $250,000 a year, they get pensions after 6 years. All of them have a public option healthcare because we pay for their healthcare in the Congress. To then be debating whether or not they're going to make sure their own constituency have what's needed in the midst of a pandemic that they messed up in the first response is immoral and it's damnable. The fact that we had to spend months arguing with Mitch McConnell over whether or not we would have liability immunity for corporations. So whatever they do this week, there's a whole lot more that has to be done, which is why what we did today was we presented the more. And we're saying we got to get out of Trump, get out of McConnell, get past the inauguration, and there's a whole lot of work. That's why the economic policy group, she had to leave, but I hope you will read their entire piece with us on the things that must take place. And that's why Shally was reading out what has to take place. Whatever they do this week is nowhere even close. Am I right, Shally? Go ahead.
Yeah, and just by a quick measure, I mean, $600 one-time stimulus payment, that translates into about 1 week of wages at $15 an hour. Meanwhile, people have been out of work for multiple weeks and months and are facing mounting rent payments, utility payments, hospital bills, all kinds of bills that have never stopped this whole time. So $600 a week, $600 one-time stimulus check is certainly not enough. Much more needs to be done. And especially as we're heading into this season and moving forward, we plan to, as everyone on this call has said, to hold Congress and this administration, to these promises that have been made and to the dire conditions at hand.
And to help them, and to help them move what needs to be moved. That's why in our campaign we touched over nearly 3 million voters, infrequent poor and low wealth voters. We pulled together over 1,500 people to do peer-to-peer touch. We've dropped all of that in Georgia now. We're going to be touching 1 million poor and low wealth voters in Georgia with our Poor People's Campaign that's on the ground. We're not endorsing per se a candidate, but we're endorsing an idea, because our people will then look at that candidate based on the ideas and based on what we have to do. But we have a lot of work. So even if the bill had been passed today, even if they had passed a $1,200 stimulus until March, that's still not it. It's not enough for the kind of recovery that's needed. So we chose to go in today to say there has to be, and what we're at least on the front end excited about is the Biden team said, in essence, said, yes, we have to do more. We have to push beyond this. That's what's going to be critical in this moment as we go forward.
And I just want to encourage folks to look at the priorities, especially that priority one that goes into what we're saying needs to happen. And again, this is coming from impacted folks. This is coming from economists when it comes to real COVID relief, real, just, free, comprehensive COVID relief, and it has to be. It has to be a direct cash payments. It has to be, funding of education. It has to be expansion of healthcare. There is so much, and none of that is included right now. And we will keep pushing because people are compelled to do so. Folks that are losing their houses are organizing. Folks that are unable to pay rent are organizing. Folks that are being made to work essential jobs, but are not getting essentials of life are organizing. And we are pulling people together in this Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, and behind these policies, because they indeed are what is needed to heal.
And Liz, for the media, one policy activism is not going to fix this. It's not just one bill, one policy. We got to get to a new administration and then have comprehensive, just, not just comprehensive, but just, and whatever policies that what we said to the Biden campaign must start from the bottom up, because that's who's been hurt the most. People at the bottom, poor, low wealth, Black people, brown people, white people are the ones that are dying and hurting the most. Essential workers. And it's the very essential workers that in most recessions don't get hit first, because most recession starts in the manufacturing area. In this recession, it's starting among people who are face-to-face, hospitality, the food industry. It's a different type of pain. And one policy action is not going to happen. That's why we said there are 14 things that need to happen in the first 50 to 100 days.
And if I could add just one thing to that Reverend Barber said earlier, which is one of the members of the team, Cecilia Munoz, pointed out that this is a bold agenda. It will require legislative action, and that will require pressure from the streets, pressure from the Poor People's Campaign. And Reverend Barber pointed out that on Monday, the Poor People's Campaign, many of the demands of these 14 demands, all of the 14 demands, are in a policy document that the 101 member Congressional Progressive Caucus will put forward with poor and low wealth people on Monday. That's 101. It takes 218 to pass something in the House. That will require massive organizing. But it's a great start to have 101 members on this agenda.
And we're prepared to do all of that organizing. And our movement is prepared to do it. And even if it requires massive nonviolent civil disobedience, we cannot ignore these issues anymore. We just can't. And so we don't want anybody to think that because we've been in because of COVID that we're not going to come out after COVID. So Yolanda, that's the week that we're at the end. It's been almost an hour. If the media has any other questions, they can send them over to Shally. You feel me? She would be honored to take care of those. Thank you, all the members of the media. Thank you, all of you who have joined. God bless you. And as we like to say, that Rob Stevens coined, forward together and not one step back. Take care.
Thank you.